Hello again, this is Dr. Reginald Yawnsworth, and tonight we're reluctantly exploring one of history's most aptly named periods. The Dark Ages, when civilization didn't so much collapse as enthusiastically throw itself off a cliff while setting everything on fire. A story of magnificent incompetence, religious extremism, and the stunning human capacity to take bad situations and make them exponentially worse through sheer determination and creative ignorance. So, settle in, perhaps light a candle if you can afford one, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Are you in France, where Charlemagne's empire crumbled faster than week-old bread? Or perhaps in England, where Vikings regularly stopped by for impromptu home renovations involving fire and axes? Wherever you are, extinguish those electric lights and let's stumble back to around 800 CE to witness humanity's greatest experiment in organized chaos. Tonight's story isn't just about decline, though there's certainly that. It's about how a civilization can forget everything it once knew and replace that knowledge with superstition, fear, and the firm belief that washing is somehow offensive to God. It's about Vikings who treated violence like a recreational sport, about monks who preserved knowledge while the world burned around them, and about the fascinating human ability to survive in conditions that would make a Bronze Age farmer weep with nostalgia. This is the story of Europe's lost centuries, darker and more confused than anything that came before, marked by the collapse of trade, the fragmentation of knowledge, and the rise of feudalism as humanity's answer to the question, how can we make life even more unfair? It's about the moment when our ancestors decided that progress was overrated and that maybe, just maybe, things were better when everyone was ignorant, terrified, and died before age 30. Chapter 1. Dawn of the Dark Nightmare. Welcome to the Dark Ages, roughly 500 CE to 1000 CE, when humanity looked at the accumulated knowledge and achievements of the Roman Empire and said, you know what? This civilization thing is overrated. Let's try ignorance, superstition, and periodic Viking raids instead. Congratulations, you've just woken up in medieval France around 850 CE, and you're about to discover what happens when society collectively decides that progress is a luxury it can't afford. Your bed is a straw-stuffed sack that doubles as a breeding ground for every parasite known to medieval science, which is to say, none of them, because medieval science consists of prayer and the occasional application of leeches. The straw hasn't been changed since your grandfather died in it, and the sack is made from coarse cloth that feels like sleeping on a bag of splinters soaked in livestock urine. You wake to the sound of church bells ringing for the 18th time today, because the church has decided that time should be measured not by the sun or practical considerations, but by how often they can remind everyone that God is watching and probably disapproved of whatever you were just thinking about. The air is thick with smoke from cooking fires, but also from the nearby village that was burned down by raiders last week and is still smouldering. Your house is a single-room wooden structure with walls so thin that privacy is a concept reserved for the dead. The construction technique involves finding some trees, cutting them badly, and hoping they don't fall down before winter kills you anyway. The roof is thatch that leaks when it rains, burns when it's dry, and provides comfortable nesting for every rodent in the county. The floor is packed earth mixed with rushes, animal droppings, food scraps, and whatever fell off people's bodies during the night. This delightful mixture is never cleaned, just covered with fresh rushes when the smell becomes overwhelming enough to offend even medieval sensibilities, which is saying something because medieval people could tolerate odors that would make a modern sewage worker resign. Your family shares this space with livestock because the concept of separate buildings for animals requires resources and planning abilities that are apparently beyond human capacity in the Dark Ages. Cows, pigs, chickens, and goats all contribute their unique aromas and waste products to the living environment, creating a homey atmosphere that combines barn, latrine, and refugee camp. The fire that's supposed to heat your home died during the night because maintaining a fire requires constant attention and fuel that you can't afford. Restarting it involves flint, steel, tinder, and enough patience to outlast the heat death of the universe. Strike wrong and you'll spend the day shivering while eating cold porridge and contemplating whether freezing to death might be preferable to living through another Dark Ages winter. There are no windows because glass is a luxury item that costs more than most people earn in a lifetime, and besides, windows would just let in light, which might encourage literacy, which is dangerous because reading leads to thinking and thinking leads to questioning authority, which is basically heresy. Instead, your home has small openings that can be covered with animal hides when the weather becomes genuinely life-threatening. Furniture consists of whatever you can build from scrap wood or salvage from abandoned buildings. Chairs are for rich people, tables are aspirational, and most activities take place on the floor, which explains why everyone has back problems and joint pain by age 25. Getting dressed in the morning requires finding whatever clothes haven't been eaten by insects, stolen by neighbors, or used as bandages for various injuries. Fashion in the Dark Ages is whatever keeps you warm enough to survive until tomorrow and modest enough to avoid accusations of vanity, which is a sin punishable by public humiliation and possibly eternal damnation. The good news? Iron tools are still around, assuming you can find someone who remembers how to make them. The bad news? Most of the knowledge about metallurgy, agriculture, and basic craftsmanship died with the fall of Rome and was replaced with folk wisdom, superstition, and the firm belief that if God wanted you to have better tools, he would have made you a nobleman. Welcome to the Dark Ages, where humanity took 1,000 years to figure out that maybe, just maybe, burning libraries and replacing education with prayer wasn't the optimal strategy for human progress. Chapter 2. The Morning Constitutional Catastrophe. Time for your morning bathroom break. And if you thought previous eras had poor sanitation, the Dark Ages have managed to elevate poor hygiene into a religious virtue, while simultaneously making waste disposal a community nightmare that would make Roman sewage engineers rise from their graves to file a complaint. Your toilet is a wooden plank with a hole in it, positioned over a pit that's shared with everyone in the village because private latrines are a luxury that only the wealthy can afford, and even they're basically just slightly better ventilated holes in the ground. The pit is supposed to be cleaned out occasionally, but occasionally, in Dark Ages terms, means when the smell becomes so overwhelming that even medieval people notice it, which could be years. The concept of toilet paper remains a distant future invention, so you're working with whatever natural materials are available, moss, leaves, corn cobs, or the time-honored tradition of using your left hand and hoping you remember which hand is which before your next meal. The left hand is considered unclean in most cultures, which makes perfect sense when you consider its primary function. Privacy is a foreign concept. The communal latrine is where business gets done, literally and figuratively. Important village decisions are made while everyone sits in a row, conducting their most vulnerable personal moments in full view of their neighbors. There are no partitions, no doors, and no pretense that basic human dignity is worth preserving. For those living in larger settlements, waste disposal involves throwing everything into the streets and hoping it flows away eventually. Street gutters carry a delightful mixture of human waste, animal droppings, kitchen scraps, and whatever unfortunate creatures died nearby. These open sewers flow directly into rivers, wells, and drinking water sources, creating a perfectly closed loop of contamination. Cleaning yourself afterward involves water if you're incredibly fortunate, or just wiping on your clothes if you're not. Most people don't bathe regularly anyway, so adding a little more filth to the general accumulation isn't considered a significant problem. The wealthy might have servants to pour water over their hands, but even they're dealing with water that's been contaminated by upstream waste disposal. Disease spreads through fecal contamination faster than gossip in a monastery. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid, and various intestinal parasites thrive in conditions where sewage and drinking water are essentially the same thing. Everyone has constant digestive problems, and stomach ailments are so common that they're considered a normal part of human existence. Chamber pots exist for nighttime use, but they're emptied by throwing the contents out the window into the street below. The traditional warning cry of "Gardyloo" is supposed to alert pedestrians to take cover, but timing is everything. And medieval people aren't known for their coordination or consideration for others. Public health is a concept that won't be invented for several centuries. Communities deal with waste by hoping it goes away, dumping it somewhere else, or accepting that life is supposed to smell terrible, and everyone is supposed to be constantly sick. The connection between sanitation and health is occasionally suspected, but never proven to anyone's satisfaction. Travelers face even worse conditions. Rural areas have no facilities whatsoever, so roadside relief involves finding a bush and hoping bandits don't attack while you're indisposed. Inns provide bucket facilities or designated outdoor areas that are even less sanitary than home arrangements. The church teaches that bodily functions are evidence of human sinfulness and that excessive attention to cleanliness is vanity. This religious justification for poor hygiene creates a culture where being filthy is not just accepted but actively encouraged as a sign of spiritual dedication. Saints are celebrated for their refusal to bathe, and cleanliness becomes associated with pride and worldliness. Monasteries have slightly better sanitation due to Roman engineering knowledge preserved by monks, but even religious communities struggle with waste disposal. Monastic latrines might have running water or better ventilation, but they're still serving communities of hundreds of people with medieval technology and ancient plumbing. Women face additional challenges because menstruation is considered evidence of female sinfulness and spiritual pollution. Menstrual hygiene involves cloth rags that are washed infrequently and shared between women. The concept of personal hygiene products doesn't exist, and women are expected to endure monthly periods without accommodation or understanding. The one advantage of Dark Ages sanitation is that everyone has identical problems, so there's no shame in poor hygiene or digestive disasters. When everyone smells terrible and has stomach problems, it's just the shared human condition rather than personal failing. Chapter 3. Breaking your fast and your will to live. Time for breakfast, and the Dark Ages have managed to take food preparation from trying to kill you to actively plotting your demise while simultaneously providing minimal nutrition and maximum suffering. Meal preparation has become less efficient than previous eras thanks to the collapse of trade networks, agricultural knowledge, and basic competence. Your morning meal consists of gruel made from whatever grains survived the winter storage without being eaten by rats, ruined by moisture, or stolen by raiders. The gruel is thick, lumpy, and flavored with whatever didn't crawl out of the grain containers during the night. With trade networks collapsed, exotic spices are replaced by local herbs that range from bland to actively poisonous, with no middle ground. Bread, when available, is dark, dense, and contains enough foreign matter to classify it as a geological sample rather than food. The flour is ground by mills powered by unreliable water sources or weak animals, and the grinding stones contribute their own special seasoning of rock dust and metal shavings. Medieval bread is less daily bread and more daily punishment for whatever sins you committed in a previous life. Your drink is ale or beer because water will kill you, and everyone knows it. Dark Ages brewing has declined from Roman and Germanic standards due to the loss of technical knowledge and reliable grain supplies. The beer is flat, warm, sour, and contains enough sediment to qualify as a thick soup. It tastes like liquid despair with a faint hint of fermented grain. Meat is available only for special occasions or if someone's livestock dies unexpectedly. Preservation techniques have regressed due to the collapse of salt trade and refrigeration knowledge. Fresh meat spoils within hours, and preserved meat is either dried to leather consistency or salted until it's basically edible salt with meat flavoring. Most meat comes from animals that died of disease or old age, which adds exciting variety to every meal. Dairy products are a daily gamble with food poisoning. Milk sours within hours, cheese develops colors that don't exist in nature, and butter becomes a breeding ground for bacteria that could be weaponized. Most dairy is consumed fermented, not because people prefer the taste, but because fermentation occasionally kills some of the harmful microorganisms. Vegetables are small, bitter, and tough due to poor agricultural techniques and seed degradation. Without Roman agricultural knowledge, crop yields have declined dramatically. Fertilizer consists of human and animal waste applied directly to crops, which means every vegetable comes preloaded with intestinal parasites and bacterial infections. Eggs are seasonal and often partially developed because chickens are free-range in the sense that they roam freely until they're eaten by predators, stolen by neighbors, or succumb to various poultry diseases. Fresh eggs are indistinguishable from spoiled ones without cracking them open, and spoiled eggs can kill you in creative and unpleasant ways. Fruits are luxury items that spoil quickly and often contain more insects than actual fruit. Apple maggots, cherry flies, and various larvae turn every piece of fruit into a protein surprise. Wild berries are available seasonally but compete with birds, animals, and various toxic species that look similar to edible varieties. Honey remains the only sweetener, but beekeeping knowledge has declined along with everything else. Wild honey is rare and often contaminated with bee stings, dead bees, and whatever the bees were eating before they died. Most people live their entire lives without tasting anything truly sweet. Food poisoning is a weekly occurrence that people plan around rather than try to prevent. Botulism from preserved meat, salmonella from eggs, and various bacterial infections are just part of medieval dining. Most families include someone who's currently sick from food-related illness, and severe poisoning can kill within days. Cooking methods have regressed to open fires with crude iron pots and wooden utensils. Temperature control involves guesswork. Timing is estimated by prayer, and proper cooking is whatever doesn't kill you immediately. Undercooking leaves parasites alive, overcooking destroys nutrients, and improper preparation can activate natural toxins in foods. Famine is a regular occurrence that can last for years. One bad harvest, one disease affecting livestock, or one Viking raid can destroy food supplies for entire regions. During famines, people eat bark, leather, grass, and anything else that might contain calories. Cannibalism becomes acceptable when starvation reaches extreme levels. Food storage is a constant battle against rot, theft, and pests. Grain storage involves hoping rats don't eat everything before winter ends. Root cellars flood, wooden containers rot, and metal storage is too expensive for most people. Much of each harvest spoils before it can be consumed. Social class determines food quality more than ever. Nobles eat white bread and fresh meat, while peasants subsist on dark bread and gruel. But even wealthy people deal with spoilage, contamination, and the basic limitations of medieval food preservation. Rich people just starve more comfortably. Malnutrition is universal except among the highest nobility. Vitamin deficiencies cause scurvy, rickets, and night blindness. Protein deficiency stunts growth and weakens immune systems. Iron deficiency causes anemia that makes people weak and vulnerable to disease. Most people are malnourished even when they have enough food to prevent immediate starvation. Chapter 4. Fashion disasters in the Age of Darkness. Time to get dressed, and your Dark Ages wardrobe makes previous eras look like fashion weeks in Paris. Clothing in the Dark Ages combines the worst aspects of poor craftsmanship, limited materials, and religious restrictions that consider any attention to appearance as evidence of vanity and spiritual corruption. Your basic outfit consists of a rough woolen tunic that's been woven by someone who learned the craft from someone who might have once seen someone who knew what they were doing. The wool comes from sheep that are poorly bred, inadequately fed, and probably diseased. The fabric is coarse, scratchy, and dyed with colors that run when wet, fade when dry, and were probably toxic to begin with. Undergarments are a luxury that most people can't afford and wouldn't want anyway, because the church teaches that excessive attention to personal comfort is sinful. Those wealthy enough for underwear wear linen garments that are washed rarely and shared between family members. Personal hygiene is considered vanity, so intimate clothing accumulates layers of filth that become part of its essential character. Your outer garments are held together with whatever's available: leather strips, rope, wooden pins, or iron fastenings if you're wealthy enough to afford metal. Buttons are a future invention, so medieval clothing involves wrapping, tying, and hoping everything stays in place during daily activities. Most clothing malfunctions involve exposure that would be embarrassing if anyone had higher standards. Pants, where worn, are loose-fitting cloth tubes that provide minimal protection from the elements. Fitted clothing requires tailoring skills that died with the fall of Rome and won't be rediscovered for centuries. Most clothing is essentially rectangular pieces of fabric sewn together with whatever thread is available, which is usually not much. Shoes are leather products cobbled together from whatever animal hides are available. The leather is poorly tanned, retains the original animal's shape and smell, and offers minimal protection from rocks, thorns, and general hostility of medieval terrain. Most people go barefoot and develop soles like leather, along with every foot parasite and fungal infection known to medieval medicine. Socks remain uninvented, so feet are either bare or wrapped in cloth strips that quickly become wet, smelly, and home to various organisms. Foot rot is epidemic, and losing toes to frostbite or infection is accepted as a normal part of winter survival. Medieval people expect their extremities to suffer and are grateful when they remain attached. Outerwear consists of cloaks made from animal skins that haven't been properly processed. These garments are waterproof only in the sense that they eventually become so saturated with grease, dirt, and accumulated filth that additional moisture can't penetrate. They're also heavy, smelly, and home to every parasite that enjoys dark, warm, moist environments. Cleaning clothes requires resources that most people don't have. Water is scarce and often contaminated, soap is expensive when available, and the time required for laundry competes with other survival activities. Most people wear their clothes until they disintegrate, then hope they can find replacements before winter arrives. The church teaches that attention to appearance is vanity, and that suffering in uncomfortable clothing is spiritually beneficial. This religious justification for poor clothing creates a culture where being uncomfortable is not just accepted but encouraged as evidence of proper spiritual priorities. Saints are celebrated for wearing hair shirts and deliberately uncomfortable garments. Women's clothing includes additional layers of modesty requirements that make daily activities nearly impossible. Long skirts drag in mud and filth, head coverings restrict vision and hearing, and multiple layers of clothing make personal hygiene even more difficult than it already is. Women are expected to be completely covered while working in conditions that would challenge modern athletes. Wealthy people have better fabrics but deal with the same basic problems of medieval tailoring and maintenance. Silk and fine linen are imported luxuries that still itch by modern standards, and elaborate clothing requires servants to help with dressing and maintenance. Rich people suffer more fashionably but still suffer constantly. Children wear smaller versions of adult clothing that provide no accommodation for play, growth, or childhood activities. Medieval childhood involves wearing uncomfortable clothes while performing adult labor in conditions that would violate every modern safety regulation. Children grow up accepting that clothing should be restrictive and uncomfortable. Color in clothing comes from dyes made from local plants, insects, and minerals, many of which are toxic. Blue dyes contain heavy metals, red dyes come from insects that may carry diseases, and yellow dyes fade quickly into brown. Most medieval clothing ends up the same muddy brown color regardless of original intent. Repairs are constant necessities because medieval clothing falls apart under normal use. Patching techniques involve sewing scraps onto existing garments until the clothing becomes more patch than original fabric. People become expert at maintaining clothing that was poorly made to begin with and subject to conditions that would destroy modern garments in days. Chapter 5. Dental Hygiene, the Medieval Mouth of Madness. Time to smile, assuming you have any teeth left, because oral hygiene in the Dark Ages makes previous eras look like modern dental clinics. Medieval dental care combines complete ignorance of dental science with religious beliefs that suffering is spiritually beneficial and pain is evidence of God's will. Teeth are still being used as tools for cracking nuts, tearing meat, holding objects, and generally treating your mouth like a workshop toolkit. Medieval diets are even more abrasive than previous eras due to poorly milled grain that contains more grit than flour. By age 25, most people's teeth are worn down to the gums from eating bread that's essentially edible sandpaper with added rocks. Toothbrushes don't exist, but some people chew on twigs or use rough cloth to scrub their teeth. This mechanical cleaning removes some plaque, but also strips away tooth enamel, accelerating decay. Most people just rinse their mouths with water or wine and hope for the best, assuming they have access to either liquid. Toothpaste alternatives include abrasive powders made from crushed bones, ground shells, or pumice stone mixed with herbs. These substances remove plaque and stains, but also remove tooth enamel and irritate gums. Using medieval tooth powder is like sandblasting your mouth, effective in the short term, but destructive long term. The Church teaches that dental pain is punishment for sin, and that accepting suffering without complaint is spiritually beneficial. This religious framework means that people are discouraged from seeking relief from dental problems and encouraged to view toothaches as opportunities for spiritual growth. Prayer is the recommended treatment for dental pain. By age 30, your mouth resembles a graveyard where only the strongest teeth survived the war against medieval food. Cavities are universal, gum disease is epidemic, and tooth loss is inevitable. People accept chronic dental pain as normal aging, like grey hair or joint stiffness. Those who lose teeth quickly learn to gum their food and are considered fortunate. Tooth extraction is performed by anyone brave enough to attempt it: blacksmiths, barbers, traveling charlatans, or local wise women. The procedure involves gripping the tooth with crude pliers and pulling until something gives way. There's no anesthesia except alcohol, no antiseptic technique, and no understanding of proper extraction methods. Dental infections are frequently fatal because the mouth is connected to the brain through convenient pathways that allow bacteria to travel from infected teeth to vital organs. What starts as a toothache can become blood poisoning, brain infection, or heart failure within days. Many people die from dental problems that would be easily treated today. Bad breath is so universal that it's not considered a social problem. Everyone has halitosis from rotting teeth, infected gums, and poor oral hygiene. Social interactions accommodate the assumption that getting close to someone's mouth will be a sensory assault. Medieval people developed strong stomach tolerance for offensive odors. Tooth grinding from stress and poor nutrition creates additional wear patterns that make chewing painful. Many people develop jaw problems from the constant grinding motion required to eat medieval food. Clicking joints, jaw pain, and difficulty opening the mouth are common problems that persist until death. Some medieval remedies for dental problems include applying heated iron to infected teeth, pulling teeth during specific phases of the moon, or placing various toxic substances into cavities. These treatments often cause more damage than the original problem, but are considered medical progress because they involve active intervention rather than passive suffering. Children often have better teeth simply because they haven't been exposed to the grinding medieval diet for as long. However, child mortality from dental infections is high, and many children die from complications of tooth decay before reaching adulthood. Those who survive childhood expect a lifetime of dental problems. Wealthy people might have access to imported remedies or trained physicians, but even noble dental care is primitive by any reasonable standard. Rich people can afford to have their teeth pulled by more experienced practitioners, but the basic limitations of medieval dental knowledge affect everyone regardless of social class. Women face additional dental challenges because pregnancy and childbirth deplete calcium stores, leading to accelerated tooth loss. The medieval saying, "gain a child, lose a tooth," reflects the reality that reproduction seriously compromises women's dental health. Multiple pregnancies often result in complete tooth loss by middle age. Monks and other religious figures sometimes preserve classical dental knowledge in monastery libraries, but this information rarely reaches the general population. Medical knowledge exists in written form but doesn't translate into practical care for most people. Literacy is required to access medical information, and literacy is reserved for the religious and noble classes. The few people who maintain decent dental health do so through luck, genetics, or access to softer foods. Medieval dental care is essentially a lottery where most people lose and the winners just lose more slowly than everyone else. Chapter 6. Working for Medieval Overlords. Time to go to work, and your Dark Ages job makes previous eras of labor exploitation look like progressive worker management relationships. Employment in the Dark Ages combines the worst aspects of feudalism, ignorance, and religious justification for treating workers like expendable equipment that occasionally requires food. If you're a serf, which you probably are since most people are bound to the land they work, your job is to farm property that belongs to your lord, while receiving just enough food to remain capable of working. Serfdom is slavery with extra steps and religious justification. You can't leave the land, can't change jobs, and can't refuse work assignments. Your children will inherit your servitude like a family heirloom made of misery. Your agricultural tools have regressed from Roman standards due to the collapse of metallurgy knowledge and trade networks. Iron plows are replaced by wooden ones that scratch the surface rather than turning soil properly. Farming techniques have declined to the point where crop yields are significantly lower than previous eras, meaning more work produces less food. The workday begins before dawn and ends after dark, 7 days a week, because the concept of weekends is reserved for religious observances that involve more work. There are no breaks, no vacation time, and no sick leave. You work through illness, injury, and exhaustion because stopping means starving, and starving means failing in your duty to your lord. Weather remains your primary enemy, but now you have additional challenges from raiders, bandits, and neighboring lords who periodically destroy crops for political or entertainment purposes. Vikings, Magyars, and various other groups treat agricultural areas like seasonal shopping centres, where they take whatever they want and burn the rest. If you're not a farmer, you might be a craftsman whose skills have degraded through loss of classical knowledge and trade disruptions. Blacksmiths work with inferior iron, carpenters build with poor tools, and weavers use low-quality materials. Technical knowledge has been lost, so craftsmanship relies on trial and error rather than proven techniques. Women work harder than men while having fewer rights and no legal protections. Female serfs handle agricultural work, food preparation, textile production, childcare, and household management, while also serving the sexual and domestic needs of their lords. There's no concept of consent, workplace safety, or compensation for female labor. Children begin working as soon as they can walk because childhood is a luxury that only wealthy families can afford. A 5-year-old might tend animals, a 7-year-old might help with harvest, and a 10-year-old performs adult labor at survival wages. Education is reserved for future clergy, and even religious education focuses on obedience rather than practical knowledge. Mining is a death sentence that involves digging ore with primitive tools while breathing toxic fumes and working in tunnels that regularly collapse. Miners develop lung diseases, suffer frequent accidents, and die young from accumulated health problems. Mine safety is whatever doesn't kill workers immediately, and replacement workers are cheaper than safety improvements. Working conditions are dangerous and completely unregulated. There are no safety standards, no protective equipment, and no compensation for workplace injuries. If you're hurt while working, you're responsible for your own medical care and survival during recovery. Many workplace injuries result in permanent disability, which means slow starvation. Your Lord has absolute power over working conditions, compensation and treatment. There are no labor laws, no worker rights, and no recourse for mistreatment. Complaining about conditions is insubordination, punishable by physical punishment, imprisonment, or exile. Workers exist to serve their superiors without question or complaint. Payment consists of survival rations and basic shelter, rather than money that could be saved or invested. Most workers never handle currency and deal entirely in barter or service obligations. The concept of economic mobility is meaningless when you're legally bound to your current situation for life. Feudal obligations require additional unpaid labor for road maintenance, bridge construction, military service, and whatever projects your lord considers necessary. These obligations compete with survival activities like food production and home maintenance. Failing to meet feudal obligations results in punishment that can include death. Guild systems control some crafts but primarily serve to limit competition and maintain quality standards that benefit masters while exploiting apprentices and journeymen. Becoming a master craftsman requires years of unpaid labor and fees that most people can't afford. Guild membership is hereditary, so social mobility through skill is nearly impossible. Seasonal unemployment affects most workers because agricultural societies can't provide year-round employment. Winter months involve attempting to survive on stored food while performing maintenance tasks and hoping you don't freeze to death before spring arrives. Many workers die during winter months from starvation and exposure. Chapter 7. Weather, meteorological warfare against humanity. Medieval weather control involves praying fervently while accepting that climate is essentially God's way of testing human endurance, and God appears to have a very creative imagination when it comes to designing meteorological torture. The Dark Ages climate is entering the medieval warm period, but warm is relative when you have no heating technology and limited protection from any weather extreme. Winter in the Dark Ages is a seasonal apocalypse that kills significant portions of the population through cold, starvation, and disease. Your house provides minimal insulation because insulation requires materials and knowledge that are expensive and rare. Heat comes from open fires that consume enormous amounts of fuel while filling your home with toxic smoke that causes respiratory problems and eye damage. Fuel scarcity means that most people freeze during winter months because wood requires tools to cut, labor to harvest, and land access that many people don't have. Charcoal is more efficient but costs money that most people don't possess. Dried animal dung burns poorly and fills homes with acrid smoke, but it's often the only fuel available for poor families. The cold kills through exposure, but also through weakened immune systems that make people vulnerable to diseases that thrive in winter conditions. Respiratory infections, joint problems, and malnutrition become severe during cold months. Many people die not from freezing but from illnesses caused by living in cold, damp conditions for months at a time. Summer brings different challenges because medieval houses become ovens that bake inhabitants slowly throughout the day and radiate stored heat during supposedly cool nights. There's no ventilation technology beyond opening doors and hoping for breezes. Heat exhaustion is common, but people can't remove clothing due to social and religious restrictions. Insects arrive in summer clouds that make outdoor work nearly impossible. Mosquitoes, flies, gnats, and other biting creatures carry diseases and make life miserable for everyone. There's no insect repellent, no protective clothing, and no escape from constant buzzing and biting. Many medieval diseases are transmitted by insects that people can't effectively combat. Spring flooding destroys crops, homes, and entire communities on an annual basis. Rivers overflow due to snowmelt and spring rains, washing away months of work and contaminating water supplies with sewage and decomposing organic matter. Flood-related diseases kill many people who survive the initial water damage. Drought can last for multiple years and destroy agricultural production across entire regions. Rivers dry up, wells fail, and crops wither, while people helplessly watch their food sources disappear. There are no irrigation systems, no water storage facilities, and no drought relief programs. Communities simply starve when water becomes unavailable. Storms can destroy years of work in hours, and medieval construction provides minimal protection from extreme weather. Hail ruins crops, wind destroys buildings, and lightning strikes cause fires that can burn entire villages. There's no weather prediction beyond folk wisdom and religious interpretation of natural signs. Extreme weather events are interpreted as divine punishment for community sins, which means that natural disasters often trigger religious persecution and social violence. Hurricanes, tornadoes, and blizzards are seen as evidence that God is angry about something, and communities look for scapegoats to blame for divine displeasure. Seasonal affective disorder affects entire populations during dark winter months, but medieval people interpret depression as spiritual failing rather than environmental response. The combination of cold, darkness, poor nutrition, and social isolation creates mental health problems that are treated with prayer and punishment rather than understanding or accommodation. Weather determines survival more than any other factor, because medieval technology provides minimal protection from environmental extremes. People plan their entire lives around surviving the next seasonal challenge, and many fail despite their best efforts. Death rates spike during extreme weather events, and entire communities can be wiped out by environmental disasters. Climate variation means that agricultural planning is essentially gambling with human lives. Good years provide enough food for survival, bad years cause famine and death. There's no crop insurance, no emergency food supplies, and no government assistance during climate disasters. Communities survive or die based on weather patterns they can't predict or control. The medieval warm period provides slightly better growing conditions than previous centuries, but medieval agricultural techniques can't take full advantage of improved climate. Warmer temperatures are offset by increased storm activity, changing precipitation patterns, and disease outbreaks that thrive in changed conditions. Clothing provides inadequate protection from weather extremes because medieval textiles are designed for durability rather than comfort or climate control. Winter clothing is heavy and restricts movement. Summer clothing traps heat and prevents cooling. Medieval people are constantly uncomfortable regardless of weather conditions. Chapter 8. Water, the medieval liquid, lottery of death. Time for hydration, and water in the Dark Ages has managed to become even more dangerous than previous eras through the impressive achievement of combining ignorance, neglect, and religious indifference to create drinking water that's essentially a bacterial weapons program with occasional water molecules. Every sip is a gamble where the house always wins and you usually die. Your water supply comes from sources that would make a Roman engineer rise from the dead to file formal complaints with whatever authorities might be available. Rivers serve as sewers, transportation routes, and waste disposal systems while simultaneously providing drinking water for downstream communities. The concept of watershed protection involves hoping that upstream neighbors don't dump too much death into your water source. Wells are community projects that require digging through layers of soil contaminated with centuries of human and animal waste. Medieval well construction involves hoping that you dig deep enough to reach clean water while avoiding underground streams that connect to surface contamination. Most wells are polluted by seepage from nearby latrines, animal burial sites, and general accumulation of medieval filth. Water storage has regressed from Roman standards because the knowledge of proper cistern construction and maintenance has been lost along with most other practical engineering skills. Clay pots crack and leak, wooden barrels rot and contaminate stored water, and metal containers are too expensive for most people to afford. The Church teaches that suffering is spiritually beneficial and that accepting contaminated water is an act of faith that demonstrates proper religious submission. This theological framework discourages efforts to improve water quality and encourages people to view waterborne illness as divine testing rather than preventable problems. Beer and ale are still safer alternatives to water, but Dark Ages brewing has declined significantly from Roman and earlier Germanic standards. The collapse of trade networks means that quality ingredients are rare. Brewing knowledge has degraded through oral transmission, and the resulting beverages are flat, sour, and barely alcoholic enough to kill some bacteria while remaining weak enough to cause chronic dehydration. Children drink watered-down ale from infancy because pure water will kill them, which creates a population that's slightly intoxicated most of the time while remaining chronically malnourished. The combination of low-alcohol beverages and poor nutrition produces adults who are perpetually dizzy, confused, and vulnerable to any disease that requires a functioning immune system. Waterborne diseases have become more virulent and widespread due to increased population density and complete absence of sanitation infrastructure. Cholera kills through violent dehydration that can drain a healthy adult in hours. Dysentery causes bloody diarrhea that persists for weeks while gradually starving victims of nutrients. Typhoid fever creates high temperatures and abdominal pain that frequently result in death. Parasitic infections are universal and accepted as normal parts of human existence. Everyone hosts intestinal worms, liver flukes, and various microscopic creatures that compete for nutrients and cause chronic health problems. Medieval people planned their lives around periodic deworming attempts, using herbal remedies that occasionally work but more often just add poisoning to the existing parasite load. The wealthy have access to slightly better water sources through deeper wells, imported water, or boiled water for cooking, but even nobles die regularly from waterborne diseases. Money can buy better water containers and servants to fetch water from more distant sources, but it can't buy immunity from bacterial contamination that affects all water sources. Bathing with contaminated water is more dangerous than not bathing at all, which conveniently aligns with religious teachings that cleanliness is vanity and spiritual corruption. Open wounds become infected, skin conditions worsen, and people often contract serious illnesses from attempting personal hygiene. The safest approach is to avoid water contact entirely. Holy water used in religious ceremonies is drawn from the same contaminated sources as drinking water, but blessed by priests who believe that divine intervention will purify whatever they're blessing. This creates situations where religious observance literally involves ingesting contaminated water while believing that faith will protect against disease. Rainwater collection seems like a logical alternative until you realize that medieval roofing materials include thatch that's home to rodents, birds, and various decomposing organic matter. Rainwater collected from medieval roofs is essentially soup made from whatever died on your roof recently, seasoned with bird droppings and rodent urine. Water treatment methods include letting water sit until visible particles settle, adding wine or vinegar to kill some bacteria, or boiling water when fuel is available. These techniques remove some contamination but don't address the bacterial load that's actually dangerous, and fuel costs mean that most people can't afford to boil water regularly. During sieges or droughts, water becomes even more precious and dangerous as communities resort to increasingly contaminated sources. Well water drops to levels where it's concentrated bacterial soup, and people drink from sources they would normally use for waste disposal. Desperation overrides safety considerations that were already minimal. Rivers that serve multiple communities become conveyor belts of disease as contamination from upstream settlements flows downstream to infect everyone along the waterway. Medieval communities are essentially connected by liquid highways of disease transmission, ensuring that waterborne illnesses spread rapidly across entire regions. Chapter 9. Medicine. The dark art of dying more expensively. Feeling sick? Time to visit your local healer, where Dark Ages medicine has managed to combine classical medical ignorance with religious superstition and barbaric folk remedies to create a healthcare system that's more dangerous than the diseases it's supposed to treat. Medieval medicine makes previous eras look like modern medical centers. Medical diagnosis relies primarily on the four-humor theory inherited from classical antiquity, but filtered through religious doctrine that adds sin and divine punishment as diagnostic categories. Every illness is caused by imbalanced humors, evil spirits, or God's displeasure with your moral behavior. Treatment involves bloodletting, prayer, and accepting that suffering is spiritually beneficial. Your healer might be a monk who learned medicine from copying classical texts he can't actually read, a village-wise woman whose training consists of folk remedies passed down through oral tradition, or a traveling charlatan who sells miracle cures made from whatever toxic substances are locally available. Medical education involves memorizing ancient errors and developing confidence in treatments that don't work. Bloodletting remains the universal cure for everything, but Dark Ages practitioners have elevated it from mere incompetence to religious ritual. Cutting open veins, applying leeches, and draining blood are performed while reciting prayers and blessing the instruments with holy water. The combination of blood loss and bacterial infection from unsterilized tools often kills patients faster than their original ailments. Surgery is performed with iron tools that haven't been sterilized, in unsanitary conditions, with no anesthesia beyond alcohol and prayer. Medieval surgeons understand less anatomy than their Roman predecessors due to religious prohibitions against dissection and the loss of classical medical knowledge. Operations are essentially controlled violence performed by people who hope divine intervention will compensate for their ignorance. Pain management consists of alcohol, herbal remedies that may or may not contain active ingredients, and religious counseling that pain is spiritual testing. Opium exists but is rare and expensive, so most people endure medical procedures while conscious and hoping they pass out before the worst parts. Anesthesia won't be developed for centuries. Medieval pharmaceuticals are made from plants, animals, and minerals chosen through superstition, tradition, and religious symbolism rather than medical efficacy. Some herbal remedies accidentally work due to active compounds, but most medicines are based on sympathetic magic, using yellow flowers to treat jaundice or ground pearls to treat madness. Mental illness is treated as demonic possession, divine punishment, or evidence of witchcraft. Treatments include exorcism, prayer, pilgrimage, and occasionally trepanation, drilling holes in skulls to release evil spirits. The success rate for medieval psychiatry is about what you'd expect from treating brain chemistry problems with religious rituals and skull drilling. Childbirth is supervised by midwives whose training consists of having survived their own births and attended other deliveries. Maternal mortality rates are catastrophic because medieval understanding of female anatomy is minimal and often completely wrong. Complications during birth usually result in the death of mother, child, or both, with prayer being the primary medical intervention. Infectious diseases are treated with remedies that would be comic if they weren't fatal. Plague is treated with bloodletting and aromatic herbs. Tuberculosis is treated with fresh air and religious pilgrimage. Malaria is treated with whatever local herbs are available. The concept of contagion is understood but ignored because religious doctrine teaches that disease is divine punishment rather than natural phenomenon. Medical knowledge exists in monastery libraries where monks copy classical texts without understanding their contents. This preserved information rarely reaches practicing healers, and even when available, it's filtered through religious interpretation that often contradicts practical medical advice. Literacy is required to access medical knowledge, but literacy is reserved for clergy who prioritize spiritual concerns over medical accuracy. Preventive medicine involves prayer, religious observance, and avoiding behaviors that might anger God. Vaccination is centuries in the future. Antibiotics are even further away, and basic hygiene is considered vanity. People hope to stay healthy through divine favor rather than expecting medical treatment to help them when they become sick. Hospitals exist primarily as religious institutions designed to provide spiritual care for the dying rather than medical treatment for the sick. Medieval hospitals focus on prayer, confession, and preparation for death rather than healing or recovery. Medical care is secondary to spiritual counseling, and patients are expected to accept death as God's will. If you become seriously ill or injured, your best hope is dying quickly before the medical treatment kills you more slowly and expensively. Recovery depends on luck, natural healing, and divine intervention rather than anything medieval healers can provide. Medical treatment often accelerates death rather than preventing it. Chapter 10. Food, the Dark Ages, Dining Disaster. Dinner time in the Dark Ages, where food safety has regressed from hope it doesn't kill you to accept that it probably will kill you eventually, and be grateful for whatever nutrition you receive before dying. The collapse of Roman agricultural knowledge, trade networks, and food preservation techniques has made eating both less nutritious and more dangerous than previous eras. Agricultural production has declined dramatically due to the loss of Roman farming techniques, seed varieties, and agricultural tools. Iron plows are replaced by wooden ones that barely scratch the soil surface. Crop rotation knowledge has been forgotten, and fertilization techniques have regressed to spreading raw human waste directly on crops without understanding proper composting or application timing. Your grain storage involves hoping that rats, mice, and insects don't eat everything before you do. Medieval storage containers provide minimal protection from pests, moisture, and contamination. Granaries are shared community facilities that become breeding grounds for vermin and disease. Much of each harvest spoils before it can be consumed, creating chronic food shortages even in good years. Bread is made from flour that contains more foreign matter than actual grain due to poor milling techniques and adulterated ingredients. Bakers add sawdust, chalk, clay, and other fillers to increase volume and profit margins. The flour is ground on stone mills that contribute rock dust and metal shavings to every loaf. Medieval bread is essentially edible geology with some grain content. Meat preservation has become more dangerous due to the collapse of salt trade networks and preservation knowledge. Salt is expensive and often contaminated with toxic substances, so meat preservation relies on smoking, drying, and hoping for the best. Improperly preserved meat develops botulism, parasites, and bacterial infections that can kill quickly or cause chronic illness. Fresh meat comes from animals that are poorly fed, diseased, and often dying when slaughtered. Livestock diseases are common and uncontrolled, so meat consumption involves sharing whatever infections the animals were carrying. Slaughter techniques are primitive and unsanitary, adding bacterial contamination to already questionable meat quality. Dairy products have become even more dangerous due to poor animal health and contaminated processing conditions. Cows, goats, and sheep are malnourished and diseased, producing milk that's already contaminated before processing begins. Cheese and butter are made in unsanitary conditions and aged in caves where they compete with naturally occurring bacteria and fungi for survival. Fish and seafood are available fresh only near water sources, and preservation techniques for inland distribution have degraded significantly. Salted fish is often oversalted to prevent spoilage, creating products that cause severe dehydration and kidney problems. Fish parasites are common and uncontrolled, so eating fish means accepting intestinal worms as part of the meal. Vegetables are grown in soil fertilized with untreated human and animal waste, which means every carrot comes preloaded with intestinal parasites, bacterial infections, and heavy metal contamination from poorly processed fertilizer. Without proper composting knowledge, medieval fertilization techniques are essentially spreading fresh sewage on food crops. Fruits are rare luxury items that spoil quickly and often contain more insects than fruit. Wild berries compete with toxic species that look similar, so foraging for fruit involves gambling with poisoning. Domestic fruits are small, bitter, and often infested with larvae from various insects that find fruit more attractive than medieval people do. Food adulteration has become creative and dangerous as merchants find new ways to increase profits through substitution and contamination. Spices are mixed with sawdust and toxic plants. Wine is watered down and flavored with lead-based sweeteners, and expensive ingredients are replaced with cheaper alternatives that may be poisonous. Cooking methods have regressed due to poor fuel availability and crude equipment. Most cooking involves open fires with primitive iron pots that provide uneven heating and poor temperature control. Food safety relies on overcooking everything until it's both sterile and nutritionally useless, or undercooking and accepting the bacterial consequences. Food poisoning is so common that it's planned for rather than prevented. Botulism, salmonella, and various bacterial infections are regular dining experiences that families expect and accommodate. Severe food poisoning can kill within days, but mild poisoning is considered normal and acceptable. Famines occur regularly and can last for multiple years due to poor agricultural techniques, climate variation, and social instability. During famines, people eat bark, leather, grass, and anything else that might contain calories. Social order breaks down as communities compete for scarce resources, and previously unthinkable foods become acceptable. Malnutrition is universal except among the highest nobility, and even wealthy people suffer from vitamin deficiencies and nutritional imbalances. Medieval diets lack variety, essential nutrients, and adequate calories for healthy development. Stunted growth, dental problems, and weakened immune systems are normal results of medieval nutrition. Social class determines food quality more dramatically than in previous eras due to the collapse of trade networks and agricultural production. Nobles eat white bread and fresh meat while peasants survive on dark bread and gruel, but even wealthy people deal with spoilage, contamination, and the basic limitations of medieval food preservation. Religious dietary restrictions add additional complications to already limited food supplies. Fasting requirements, meat prohibitions during religious seasons, and complex dietary laws create situations where people are prohibited from eating available food while starving. Religious observance often conflicts with survival needs. Chapter 11. Religion. The medieval divine protection racket. Time for spiritual fulfillment, where Dark Ages religion has evolved into a comprehensive system of social control that makes previous eras of God-placating look like casual weekend activities. Medieval Christianity has organized itself into an institutional bureaucracy that controls every aspect of life while demanding payment, obedience, and acceptance that suffering is spiritually beneficial. Your spiritual life revolves around a complex hierarchy of religious obligations that consume enormous amounts of time and resources while providing minimal comfort or practical assistance. The Church has replaced classical polytheism with monotheistic totalitarianism, where one God demands complete devotion while delegating daily torture to saints, angels, and demons who seem personally invested in human misery. Religious obligations are extensive and expensive, requiring regular attendance at services, payment of tithes, donations for church construction, and participation in religious festivals that consume resources communities can't afford. The Church demands 10% of everything you produce while providing spiritual services that primarily involve being told that you're sinful and deserve whatever suffering you're experiencing. Churches are massive construction projects that require enormous resources and human labor extracted from communities that can barely survive. Workers die building monuments to God's glory while their families starve, but refusing to support church construction is heresy punishable by excommunication, social exile, or death. Medieval churches are built with the blood and sweat of people who never benefit from their construction. Priests have evolved into a professional class with extensive political power, economic influence, and legal authority that extends far beyond spiritual matters. They control access to salvation, interpret divine will, and demand payment for religious services. The clergy lives comfortably while their parishioners struggle, claiming that their comfort is necessary for proper religious service and divine favor. Religious festivals consume enormous community resources through feasting, drinking, and elaborate celebrations that are mandatory for all residents. These festivals supposedly ensure divine favor, and community solidarity, but they often leave communities economically exhausted and vulnerable to attack from neighbors who didn't waste resources on religious parties. Sin and redemption have become complex bureaucratic processes that require extensive documentation, financial payments, and ongoing religious supervision. Everything enjoyable is sinful, everything necessary for survival is morally questionable, and salvation requires constant vigilance against natural human impulses that have been redefined as spiritual failings. Hell has been developed into a detailed geography of eternal punishment, where most people will spend eternity being tortured for failing to meet impossible religious standards during their brief earthly lives. The afterlife is not a reward for good behavior, but a continuation of earthly suffering under direct divine supervision, with torture techniques that make medieval punishments look merciful. Religious law covers every aspect of daily life through complex moral codes that regulate behavior, dietary choices, sexual activity, economic transactions, and social relationships. Breaking religious law is not just a crime against God, but a threat to community safety that must be eliminated through punishment, exile, or execution. Heresy is defined as any religious belief that differs from official church doctrine, and heretics face persecution that includes torture, imprisonment, property confiscation, and execution. Independent thinking about religious matters is forbidden, and faith is enforced through social pressure, legal penalties, and physical violence. Religious education involves memorizing prayers, learning catechism, and accepting official interpretation of scripture without question or analysis. Literacy is controlled by religious authorities who determine what people are allowed to read and how they're allowed to interpret written material. The Bible is available only in Latin, which most people can't read. Saints provide specialized spiritual services through complex prayer systems that require specific rituals, offerings, and intercession procedures. Different saints handle different problems, but they all demand devotion, payment, and acceptance that their help may not be forthcoming despite proper observance of required rituals. Pilgrimage becomes a religious obligation that requires extensive travel to distant shrines and holy sites, consuming time and resources that people need for survival. Pilgrims face dangers from bandits, disease, and travel hazards while believing that their suffering during pilgrimage will earn spiritual merit and divine favor. Religious persecution targets anyone whose beliefs, practices, or ethnicity don't conform to Christian orthodoxy. Jews, Muslims, pagans, and heretics face systematic discrimination, violence, and forced conversion. Religious minorities are blamed for natural disasters, disease outbreaks, and social problems that have natural causes. The Church provides some comfort and community support during times of crisis, but it extracts a high price in terms of personal freedom, economic resources, and intellectual autonomy. Religion offers explanations for suffering and hope for divine intervention, but it also creates additional sources of anxiety and demands that compete with basic survival needs. Monasteries preserve classical knowledge and provide some medical care, but they also control access to education and information. Monks copy ancient texts without necessarily understanding their contents, and preserved knowledge is filtered through religious interpretation that often contradicts practical applications. Chapter 12. Women in the Dark Ages, Expert Mode with no respawn. If you thought being a man in the Dark Ages was challenging, try experiencing it as a woman. All the same, dangers, diseases, and deprivations, plus the additional excitement of being considered legal property, spiritually inferior, and personally responsible for all human suffering since Eve's unfortunate apple incident. Women in the Dark Ages face life on nightmare difficulty with no cheat codes, and respawn is prohibited by religious doctrine. From birth, girls are valued significantly less than boys because they represent economic burdens rather than assets in feudal society. Female infanticide is common during times of scarcity, and families that can't afford to raise all their children consistently choose to abandon girls rather than boys. Surviving childhood as a female requires luck, family resources, and community conditions that are rarely optimal. Marriage is an economic transaction negotiated between men who view women as livestock with reproductive capabilities. Girls are married as children to men they've never met, often to strangers from distant communities. Your opinion about the arrangement is not solicited, considered, or valued. The bride price is negotiated like any commodity transaction, and you're transferred from your father's ownership to your husband's like valuable property. Once married, you become legal property with fewer rights than domestic animals under medieval law. Your husband owns your body, your children, your labor, and anything you might produce. You cannot own land, make contracts, represent yourself in legal proceedings, or make decisions about your own life. If your husband dies, you might be inherited by male relatives, sold to pay debts, or abandoned to survive through charity. Childbirth is a death sentence you must repeatedly face throughout your fertile years without medical care, pain relief, or understanding of safe delivery practices. Maternal mortality rates range from 15 to 30% per birth, and most women face multiple pregnancies. There's no prenatal care, no trained medical assistance, and no sterile technique during delivery. You give birth attended by midwives whose qualifications consist of having survived their own births. Birth control is limited to herbal remedies that occasionally work, withdrawal methods that rarely work, and religious prohibition of any effective contraception. The Church teaches that preventing pregnancy is sinful interference with God's will, so women spend their fertile years either pregnant, nursing, recovering from childbirth, or mourning dead children. Work is constant, uncompensated, and invisible to economic accounting systems that don't recognize female labor as valuable. Women handle household management, food preparation, textile production, agricultural work, childcare, elder care, and often skilled crafts while receiving no payment, recognition, or legal protection. You work from dawn to dusk with no breaks, no assistance, and no acknowledgement that your labor has economic value. Education is prohibited for most women because literacy is considered dangerous for female minds that are supposedly incapable of rational thought. The Church teaches that women are intellectually inferior by divine design and that education leads to pride, questioning of authority, and moral corruption. Female literacy is restricted to upper-class women who might learn to read religious texts under male supervision. Legal protection is essentially non-existent because women can't represent themselves in court and depend on male guardians who may not act in their interests. Rape is treated as property damage against your father or husband rather than assault against you personally. Domestic violence is considered a husband's right to discipline his property, and murder of women by male relatives is often ignored if there were acceptable reasons. Economic independence is impossible because women can't own businesses, inherit property equally, or control their earnings. Any money you make belongs to your male guardian, and your economic security depends entirely on maintaining the favor of men who view you as useful but replaceable. Widowhood often brings destitution because property passes to male heirs rather than surviving wives. Religious doctrine teaches that women are spiritually inferior beings who bear responsibility for original sin and human suffering. Female sexuality is considered inherently evil, and women's bodies are viewed as temptations that lead men to sin. Religious women can achieve limited respect through complete renunciation of sexuality and submission to male religious authority. Widowhood brings new vulnerabilities as you lose whatever legal protection marriage provided while facing economic destitution and social isolation. You might be forced to marry your deceased husband's brother, sold to pay his debts, or left to survive on charity from relatives who consider you a burden. Widows without male protection are vulnerable to exploitation, abuse, and accusations of witchcraft. Healthcare for women is limited and often dangerous because medieval medical knowledge about female anatomy is minimal and usually wrong. Medical treatments for women are based on religious doctrine about female spiritual corruption rather than practical understanding of physiology. Women are expected to suffer in silence and accept pain as punishment for Eve's sins. Violence against women is legal and socially acceptable as long as it's perpetrated by male family members or authority figures. Husbands can beat wives, fathers can abuse daughters, and male employers can assault female workers without legal consequences. Women who fight back against violence face punishment for attacking their superiors. The few women who achieve power or influence do so through exceptional circumstances like royal birth, religious calling, or survival skills so remarkable they cannot be ignored. But even powerful women face constant challenges to their legitimacy and rule at the sufferance of male authorities who can withdraw support at any time. In summary, being a woman in the Dark Ages means facing all the dangers and hardships of medieval life while navigating a social system specifically designed to control your body, limit your options, and deny your humanity. Women survive not because the system supports them, but because women possess remarkable resilience that allows them to endure systems designed to destroy them. Chapter 13. Justice and Violence. The Medieval Legal Horror Show. Welcome to Dark Ages Justice, where the legal system has evolved from previous eras' might makes right into a sophisticated framework of laws, punishments, and procedures that are more organized but exponentially more creative in their brutality. Medieval law and order exist primarily to protect property and maintain social hierarchies while providing public entertainment through spectacular violence. Legal codes have become more comprehensive but explicitly recognize different social classes with separate legal standards for nobles, clergy, merchants, and peasants. The same crime receives different punishments depending on the social status of both perpetrator and victim. Killing a nobleman might result in execution, while killing a peasant might require only financial compensation to the victim's owner. Courts and legal procedures have developed complex bureaucracies with judges, juries, and legal advocates, but justice depends heavily on social connections, financial resources, and religious standing. Legal representation is expensive and often corrupt, evidence standards are primitive, and trial outcomes are frequently predetermined by political considerations rather than facts. Trial by ordeal remains common for serious crimes because medieval legal theory assumes that God will intervene to protect the innocent. Accused individuals might be required to carry red-hot iron, plunge their hands into boiling water, or walk across burning coals. Surviving the ordeal proves innocence. Dying proves guilt posthumously, which is convenient for everyone except the accused. Trial by combat allows disputes to be settled through physical violence, with the theory that God will ensure victory for the righteous party. This system works well for professional warriors and poorly for everyone else, creating a legal framework where might literally makes right. Wealthy defendants can hire professional champions to fight on their behalf. Criminal punishment has become public entertainment designed to maximize suffering while demonstrating the consequences of challenging authority. Executions, floggings, and mutilations are performed in front of crowds who treat them like holiday festivals. Children are brought to watch criminals being tortured to death as part of their moral education. The death penalty is prescribed for numerous crimes beyond murder, including theft, adultery, blasphemy, heresy, witchcraft, and various other offenses that threaten social order or religious orthodoxy. Execution methods include hanging, burning, drowning, crucifixion, drawing and quartering, and creative combinations designed to maximize both suffering and public spectacle. Physical punishment for non-capital crimes involves flogging, branding, mutilation, and public humiliation designed to mark criminals permanently while deterring future offenses. Thieves lose hands, liars have tongues cut out, and various other mutilations serve as permanent advertisements of criminal behavior. These punishments often result in infection, disability, or delayed death. Torture is a legal investigative technique used to extract confessions and information from accused criminals. Medieval torture devices are engineered to cause maximum pain without immediate death. allowing interrogations to continue for days or weeks. Confessions obtained through torture are considered legally valid regardless of their accuracy. Imprisonment is rare because maintaining prisoners is expensive, so most criminals are punished immediately through physical means or executed. Prisons exist mainly for holding accused individuals awaiting trial or execution, not as long-term punishment. The concept of rehabilitation through imprisonment is unknown because criminals are considered inherently evil rather than potentially reformable. Slavery and serfdom are legal institutions that provide economic benefits to property owners while denying basic rights to workers. Slaves can be bought, sold, tortured, or killed at their owner's discretion, and children are born into hereditary bondage. Serfdom binds workers to land they can never leave, creating legal frameworks for permanent exploitation. Domestic violence is not only legal but expected as part of proper household management. Husbands have the right and obligation to discipline wives and children through physical punishment, including severe beatings that would be considered torture if applied to free adults. Women and children who resist domestic violence face legal punishment for disobedience. Blood feuds and vengeance cycles are legally recognized methods of conflict resolution that create multi-generational violence between families and communities. Legal systems attempt to regulate blood feuds through compensation payments and formal procedures, but vengeance obligations often override legal settlements and perpetuate ongoing violence. Religious courts handle crimes against church doctrine through ecclesiastical law that operates parallel to secular legal systems. Heresy, blasphemy, witchcraft, and moral offences are prosecuted by religious authorities who use torture, imprisonment, and execution to enforce spiritual compliance. Religious courts often claim jurisdiction over secular matters when convenient. International law consists of treaties and agreements that last only as long as both parties find them beneficial, and warfare is regulated by customs that are routinely ignored when inconvenient. War crimes are not recognized as legal concepts, so armies engage in rape, pillage, and massacre of civilian populations as standard military practice. Women, children, slaves, and serfs have minimal legal rights and cannot represent themselves in court proceedings. Legal testimony from these groups is worth less than testimony from free adult males, and they cannot testify against their social superiors under any circumstances. Legal protection depends on social status and male guardianship. If you're accused of a crime, your best defense is wealth, social connections, political influence, or the ability to flee before trial. Guilt or innocence are less important than your ability to navigate the legal system and survive whatever punishment is imposed. Justice is not blind. It's completely focused on maintaining social order and protecting the interests of the powerful while providing entertainment for the masses. Chapter 14: Death and Disease. The Dark Ages collection of mortality. Time to explore the Dark Ages' impressive expansion of ways to die, which has grown significantly from previous eras thanks to urban overcrowding, collapsed public health systems, religious prohibition of medical advancement, and the creative application of ignorance to every aspect of healthcare. Death comes in more varieties than ever before, and life expectancy has reached new lows that would be impressive if they weren't tragic. Infectious diseases have become more diverse and deadly due to increased population density, collapsed sanitation systems, and complete abandonment of classical medical knowledge. Cities are breeding grounds for epidemics that can kill thousands within weeks, and rural areas provide perfect conditions for endemic diseases that slowly drain communities of life and vitality. The Black Death and other plague variants are constant threats that can wipe out entire communities overnight. Plague spreads through rat fleas, but medieval understanding of disease transmission involves evil spirits, divine punishment, and astrological influences rather than actual biological mechanisms. Treatment consists of prayer, bloodletting, and aromatic herbs that provide no protection against bacterial infection. Malaria thrives in areas with poor drainage and standing water, which describes most medieval settlements that have abandoned Roman engineering knowledge. The disease causes recurring fevers that gradually weaken victims until they die from complications or secondary infections. Mosquito control involves prayer and hoping that divine intervention will reduce insect populations. Tuberculosis is endemic in crowded urban areas where people live in close quarters with poor ventilation and no understanding of airborne disease transmission. The disease slowly destroys lungs over months or years while spreading to entire families through respiratory droplets. Treatment involves fresh air, prayer, and accepting that wasting away is God's will. Gastrointestinal diseases are universal due to complete breakdown of sanitation systems and contaminated water supplies. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever kill through dehydration and nutrient depletion while causing severe suffering. These diseases can kill within days or persist for weeks, and treatment involves bloodletting that accelerates death through additional fluid loss. Parasitic infections are assumed to be normal parts of human existence because everyone has intestinal worms, liver flukes, and various microscopic organisms living in their bodies. Some parasites cause anemia, others damage vital organs, and a few cause brain infections that lead to seizures and death. Deworming involves toxic herbal remedies that sometimes kill parasites but often kill patients. Injuries that would be minor today become fatal through infection and lack of proper medical care. Small cuts become gangrenous, broken bones heal incorrectly and cause permanent disability, and burns from fires or cooking become infected and kill through sepsis. Medieval wound care involves prayer, herbal poultices, and hoping that divine intervention will compensate for medical ignorance. Childbirth and infant mortality remain catastrophically high due to complete absence of medical knowledge about safe delivery practices. Roughly half of all children die before age 5 from disease, malnutrition, accidents, or birth complications. Women face death rates of 20 to 30% per childbirth, and survivors often suffer permanent injuries that affect their health and future pregnancies. Occupational diseases are common and accepted as normal consequences of working life. Miners develop lung diseases from dust inhalation and toxic exposure, metal workers suffer from heavy metal poisoning, and agricultural workers are injured by animals and primitive equipment. Workplace safety involves prayer and accepting that death is an occupational hazard. Malnutrition weakens immune systems and makes every disease more dangerous while being universal, except among the highest nobility. Vitamin deficiencies cause scurvy, rickets, night blindness, and various other conditions that would be easily preventable with proper nutrition. Protein deficiency stunts growth and development, while iron deficiency causes anemia that makes people weak and vulnerable. Mental illness is misunderstood and treated as evidence of demonic possession, divine punishment, or witchcraft. Depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress from violence and trauma are seen as spiritual failings rather than medical conditions. Treatment involves exorcism, prayer, imprisonment, or execution, depending on how the mental illness manifests and who it affects. Natural disasters kill thousands and leave survivors vulnerable to disease, starvation, and social collapse. Earthquakes, floods, droughts, and volcanic eruptions destroy agricultural production and contaminate water supplies while communities lack any disaster relief or emergency response capabilities. People affected by natural disasters are left to survive through individual effort and community charity. Epidemic diseases can eliminate entire communities when new pathogens are introduced through trade or military contact. Populations with no immunity to foreign diseases can lose 50 to 90% of their members within months. The absence of quarantine procedures or disease control measures ensures that epidemics spread rapidly across entire regions. Violence and warfare are constant threats that affect civilians as much as soldiers. Armies routinely engage in rape, pillage, and massacre of non-combatants as standard practice. Bandits, pirates, and other criminals prey on travelers and isolated communities, while personal disputes often escalate to deadly violence in cultures that value honor and revenge above peaceful resolution. Suicide becomes more common as life becomes increasingly difficult and hopeless for large portions of the population. People facing slavery, torture, starvation, or unbearable chronic pain often choose death on their own terms, through poison, hanging, drowning, or deliberately provoking fatal conflicts with authorities. Medical treatment is often more dangerous than the diseases it's supposed to cure because medieval medicine is based on religious doctrine and classical errors rather than practical knowledge. Bloodletting weakens patients, toxic remedies cause additional poisoning, and surgical procedures are performed without antiseptic technique or proper anesthesia. Death in the Dark Ages is frequent, random, and often preventable with basic knowledge and technology that existed in previous eras but has been lost or abandoned. You can follow all available medical advice and still die from diseases that were treatable in Roman times because medical knowledge has regressed rather than advanced. The randomness and frequency of death create psychological trauma for survivors who must cope with constant loss while lacking any effective means of preventing or treating most medical conditions. Communities develop elaborate religious rituals to cope with mortality rates that would be considered catastrophic in any modern context. Chapter 15, The Dark Ages Reality Check. So there you have it. Life in the Dark Ages, where humanity managed to take the accumulated knowledge and achievements of classical civilization and replace them with ignorance, superstition, and creative new ways to make existence more miserable than anyone previously thought possible. This was supposed to be Christian civilization at its finest, but it turned out that replacing classical learning with religious doctrine was not an improvement. The Dark Ages represent humanity's greatest experiment in voluntary ignorance, where societies deliberately abandoned proven technologies, effective government systems, and practical knowledge in favor of religious orthodoxy and feudal oppression. The result was a civilization that was simultaneously more organized and more dysfunctional than anything that came before. Technological regression was real and dramatic. Roman engineering knowledge was lost, leading to the collapse of sanitation systems, roads, and urban infrastructure. Agricultural techniques declined, causing reduced crop yields and chronic food shortages. Medical knowledge regressed to the point where treatments that had been effective for centuries were replaced with prayer and bloodletting. But the regression wasn't just technological, it was intellectual and social. Classical learning was replaced with religious doctrine that discouraged questioning, investigation, and independent thinking. Social mobility was eliminated through feudalism that bound people to hereditary roles. Women lost what few rights they had possessed under Roman law. Yet somehow, despite systemic oppression and institutional ignorance, people continued to hope, dream, and work toward better futures. They fell in love, raised families, created art, and built communities. Monks preserved classical knowledge in monastery libraries, even if they didn't always understand what they were copying. Craftsmen maintained technical skills through guild systems. Farmers slowly improved agricultural techniques through trial and error. The Dark Ages weren't uniformly dark. There were bright spots where knowledge was preserved and progress continued. Islamic civilization maintained and advanced classical learning, while Christian Europe struggled with ignorance. The Byzantine Empire preserved Roman traditions and knowledge. Viking trade networks connected distant regions and facilitated cultural exchange. What's remarkable about the Dark Ages is not that people suffered. Suffering was universal and expected in medieval society. What's remarkable is that civilization survived at all, given the systematic destruction of knowledge, institutions, and social progress that characterized the period. European society hit bottom and somehow managed to avoid complete collapse. The religious framework that caused so much suffering also provided some comfort and meaning for people whose lives were otherwise brutal and hopeless. Christianity offered explanations for suffering and hope for better conditions in the afterlife, even if it failed to improve earthly conditions. Religious communities provided some social support and preserved literacy, even while restricting access to knowledge. Feudalism was oppressive and unfair, but it provided some stability and protection in a world where central government had collapsed and violence was constant. The feudal system was exploitative, but it was also organized in ways that allowed agricultural production to continue and communities to survive despite external threats. The Dark Ages taught important lessons about the fragility of civilization and the dangers of abandoning reason in favor of ideology. When societies stop valuing knowledge, questioning authority, and seeking practical solutions to problems, they regress rapidly toward conditions that make life nasty, brutish, and short. But the Dark Ages also demonstrated human resilience and the stubborn refusal to accept that progress is impossible. Even during the worst periods of ignorance and oppression, some people continued to learn, create, and innovate. They preserved seeds of knowledge that would eventually grow into the Renaissance and scientific revolution. The period ended not because people gave up trying to improve their lives, but because they gradually rediscovered classical knowledge and began applying reason to practical problems. The Crusades, for all their violence and religious fanaticism, brought Europeans into contact with Islamic learning and Byzantine knowledge. Trade began to revive, bringing new ideas along with exotic goods. Agricultural innovations like the heavy plough, three-field system, and improved crop varieties slowly increased food production and supported larger populations. Technical innovations in architecture, metalworking, and manufacturing began to improve living conditions. Universities were founded to preserve and advance learning. We stand on the shoulders of Dark Ages people who preserved classical knowledge and maintained technical skills despite religious and political pressures to abandon learning in favor of faith. Every comfort we enjoy, every right we take for granted, every scientific advance that improves our lives exists because medieval people refused to accept that ignorance was preferable to knowledge. The Dark Ages couldn't imagine our world of electric lights, clean water, effective medicine, and global communication any more than Iron Age people could, but they made modern civilization possible by preserving and slowly rebuilding the foundations of learning and technical knowledge that had been nearly destroyed. Today we face our own challenges with anti-intellectual movements, religious extremism, and political systems that sometimes seem designed to promote ignorance rather than knowledge. The Dark Ages remind us that civilization can regress as well as progress, and that maintaining knowledge and reason requires constant effort. But like our Dark Ages ancestors, we keep believing that tomorrow might be better than today. We keep working towards solutions to problems that seem insurmountable, just as they did. We keep trying to make life better for future generations, even when current conditions seem hopeless. The Dark Ages taught us that human beings are remarkably resilient creatures who can survive even the most oppressive and ignorant social systems. Medieval people lived through centuries of systematic oppression so that we wouldn't have to, and they did it not because they were heroes, but because they were human beings who refused to give up hope.